Welcome to the Gold Coast North Anglican Church podcast. We're a vibrant church on the Gold Coast in Queensland, Australia. Our worship styles are traditional through to modern, and we have families through to seniors. Our mission is to spread the good news of Jesus Christ throughout Australia and the rest of the world, and to encourage everyone who encounters us to reach their potential in Jesus Christ.
Well, there are a number of famous people, celebrities, who are Christians. And I find it an interesting kind of thing when people, actors, sports stars, musicians and so on, say that they are a Christian. On the one hand, I can be really encouraged and think, oh, that's great. It's great that there's someone who's well known and perhaps in a position of influence who says quite openly and unapologetically that they are a Christian. I can find that really quite inspiring and encouraging, and sort of hope that maybe people might look to them and think, gosh, maybe I need to look into this Jesus guy too. Of course, it goes the other way. Sometimes there are people who say they are a Christian. I think, but the way you're living and what's going on, gosh, I'm not sure you're a great example for people. And you can be a little bit kind of, gosh, don't look at them as an example of what the Christian faith is about. Of course, at its heart, Christianity is not about good people living good lives, setting a great example. It's about people who put their faith in Christ, who don't always get it right. In fact, we see them throughout the whole Bible, people who spectacularly get it wrong. But people who ultimately have faith in God and put their trust in Him, and by God's grace seek to grow and move slowly but surely into the person that God has made them to be. Someone who has quite famously over the years declared that they are a Christian is the Queen. And so maybe you're a royalist, maybe you're not, but hopefully you might be encouraged by her. And often she uses her Christmas speech to declare her own faith. And in fact, in 2016 in her Christmas address, she said this: Jesus Christ lived obscurely for most of his life and never travelled far. He was maligned and rejected by many, though he had done no wrong. And yet, billions of people now follow his teaching and find in him their guiding light for their lives. I am one of them. That apparently made a bit of an impact back in 2016 when she made that address, that she would so openly declare that, yes, I am someone who has put my faith in Jesus and is following him and lets him kind of guide and illuminate my life. It was very, very encouraging. It can be hard to say that you are a Christian in today's world. Now, in most Western countries, we're pretty blessed, we're not going to be persecuted, physically abused, imprisoned, put to death for our faith, for saying that we're Christian. But in some quarters you might get some odd looks, you might get a remark, a comment in relation to the fact that you're a Christian. And sometimes it can make us feel a bit hesitant to declare that we in fact are a Christian. We're starting a new series today as we look at the reading set for this current season from Easter to Pentecost, looking at the book of Acts. And we're looking at what this early Christian community, what it meant to follow Jesus, how they became, how they organised, how they tried to make sense of it all, and how they tried to live out being a follower of Christ, being a Christian. And my hope is, as we explore this early community, we might be encouraged to say that I'm a Christian. Once upon a time, you socially, particularly Australia and other nations, you kind of had to say you're a Christian whether you weren't or not. It was the socially acceptable thing to do. But in some ways, it's not so much in some quarters today. And so I want us to have the confidence to go, you know what, I'm not worried about what other people think. I'm proud to say that I'm a Christian. But it means something different perhaps to what others might say it is. And conversely, hopefully we are challenged that how we're living, our behaviours, reflect what it means to be a Christ follower. We're not going to be perfect, we're going to make mistakes, but how we live and how we love is going to impact people and go, if you say you're a Christian, what does that mean? Is there any difference to you? Because in some ways, it could be argued that there's not a lot of difference between Christians and the wider world, that we've either absorbed their culture or they've absorbed a bit of ours. But yet we are called to see the world differently and to live differently in response. And so today, as we look at our Acts reading from chapter 4, we're going to be challenged to see that we are the church, that I'm a Christian and I am the church. Many people would go to church and you turn up, you attend and you go home. You might watch online and then get on with your day. And the church is the priest, it's the deacons, it's the bishops, it's the institution, maybe it's parish council, maybe it's the wardens, maybe it's those people that serve and do things. But we're going to be challenged today to see that actually we don't go to church, we are the church. And in fact, that's the first point out of our passage today, that we are the church. You don't go to church, you are the church. And so we see that in Acts chapter 4 verse 32. And Acts, just a little bit of context, was written by a guy called Luke, who the Gospel of Luke is attributed to. And so the men is like two parts of a whole. The book of Luke, the Gospel of Luke, looking at the life of Jesus. The book of Acts, looking at what happened after Jesus. And he tried to basically, he didn't follow Jesus, he didn't know Jesus directly, but he interviewed all the eyewitnesses like an investigative journalist and gathered all the reports and put it together to make an orderly account, so that his purpose is that you might believe what is said about this Jesus is true. And so this is our only our main account of and main biblical account of in a sort of narrative form of what happened after Jesus. And so the first point out of our passage is, you don't go to church, you are the church. Now the whole group of those who believe were of one heart and one soul. No one claimed private ownership of any possessions, but everything they owned was held in common. And so the whole group, all of those who had put their faith in Jesus and would declare that they are followers of his, they were one group, and they believed who believed they were of one heart and soul. There was a unity, a oneness about them, and they claimed, and no one claimed private ownership of any possessions. And so we see that this whole group is the church. It's not sort of stratified into sort of different groups. The whole group is the church, and they have this unity of soul and mind and heart. And we see that they actually establish some common ownership, that as the whole church, they own some things in common. And so what it tells us is that you don't attend church. You don't sort of come and just sort of sit in the pew or tune in online and then just go about your business. You are the church. And that everything that is the church is owned in common. And so therefore it's our responsibility. It's kind of ours to care for and steward and to contribute to in that regard. And so as someone who is a Christian, you need to understand that you are the church, and that you don't go, but you are the church. Now the passage continues, and as the church, our job is to give a testimony or a witness of who Jesus is and his impact on our lives. We see that with great power the apostles gave their testimony to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great grace was upon them all. And so we see Peter and co preaching with power, saying, this Jesus that died has risen again. And they were preaching and teaching and extolling and exhorting people to put their faith in Jesus. And so we see that in church there's kind of different ways of communicating and different kind of authorities and roles. So as a priest in the Anglican Church, I'm licensed and have authority to preach. I've gone through the training and so on and so forth. And so I can preach. Our deacons can preach. Some lay people can, if they do certain studies, can be trained up and if they're approved, can be licensed to preach. And so each Sunday as we prepare these sermons and so forth as part of our worship, we are giving testimony, hopefully, to the resurrection of Christ, pointing to people to this risen Jesus. But of course, it's not just the apostles, not just the ordained or the specifically theologically trained people that are called to give their testimony. If we are the church, we're all called to give our testimony, to bear witness to who Jesus is and what difference he makes in our lives. And so if we don't go to church, and we are the church, and so therefore we've got to make a contribution to the church, we also have to be people who, when we go out, testify, share our story. And so I'd love to encourage you, as kind of like a bit of homework after this, to sit down and write out your story of faith. Now, there's different ways of doing it. You could write full text and write pages and pages. You might make a bunch of bullet points and just sort of, what are the key events? You might do what's called a mind map, where you kind of, write your name or something in the middle, and then off that have a whole bunch of different kind of key events in circles and things leading off it, just to give you a sense of your story, to reflect on it. Because sometimes if we don't stop and reflect, it can be hard to then put into words our story when perhaps God gives us the opportunity to share. Often, people aren't going to be looking for deep theological arguments. And often we don't feel trained or equipped to kind of, engage in rigorous intellectual debate about the Christian faith. But what we can do is we can love and bless people, and as the opportunity presents, share our story, our experience of God. But to do that, we need to be a little bit prepared. And so I'd love to encourage you, as homework out of today's sermon, you might say, and this is the old school teacher in me, using the word homework, is to actually sit down and spend some time reflecting and jotting down your testimony. And then I'd love to encourage you maybe to share it with someone you trust, a fellow Christian, a fellow believer, maybe in your small group. Maybe reach out through this online medium and share that way, that you might, and the key in sharing your story is not to sort of make it too long in one sense, not to kind of, make it a 20-minute monologue, but to be able to sort of in a few minutes say, hey, look, this is kind of who God is and how God turned up in my life and the difference it makes. And that leads us to the other point, not just the length, but also the focus. The focus needs to be on God and what God has done in your life, not how you've done this and I've done this and I, because that makes it about you, and really it needs to be about God. So we're called to give our testimony. We have ways of preaching and teaching in the church that is a sort of a formal testimony, but your own personal testimony is so important too. We then see that charity begins at home. If we are the church, we give our testimony, and we have to kind of love and look after each other as the church family. Are we called to love and look after people beyond church walls? Absolutely. Jesus makes that very clear. The example of the apostles makes that clear. We see in the letters, absolutely clear. We're called to love people beyond our church walls, but it starts at home, as the old saying goes. And so we see through the rest of this passage that they use their resources to bless and support each other. There was not a needy person among them. For as many owned lands or houses, sold them and brought the proceeds of what was sold, and they laid it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to each as any had need. And then in fact it goes on to give this example of Joseph, who became known as Barnabas, the son of encouragement, and he sold a field and laid it at the apostles' feet. And so we see people using their resources to bless others. Now, in Jesus' day, there was, and in this apostolic day, you might say, post Jesus, this early time of Acts, there was no actual, as far as we're aware, social security system. There was no safety net. People were on their own. You didn't work, you couldn't eat. If you didn't have family look after you, you were in trouble. And so in many ways, we're pretty blessed today materially. We've got a wonderful sort of safety net in Australia in terms of the welfare system. And we've got, we're very economically quite well off. And as I look around my churches, I know sometimes people have seasons where they struggle, but we seem to be hanging in there through to doing quite well. And so the invitation perhaps isn't so much to be selling everything and giving it to the church to redistribute to the poor. God might be calling you to do that, I don't know. But when it comes to caring for each other, we can use our time and our energy and our resources to be loving and blessing and checking in on each other. To sort of notice who's missing around you, maybe even in an online sense. You can check in with each other, maybe become friends with each other and send messages to each other. We're called to love and bless each other. Sometimes that might mean giving money. And I know when I was a theological student and made the decision to go full-time with study, some beautiful souls sort of just came up and gave me money and said, God said for me to give you this, or I just felt led to support you, John, and here is some money. And it was so needed and such a blessing. And I've over the years tried to pay it forward, as that saying goes, to bless others as well. And so charity begins at home. And so in terms of living this out, we're called to be the church. And this passage really challenges this mindset. And maybe you've said it. Maybe you've heard others say it, that says, I don't need to go to church to believe in God. I don't need to go to church to be a Christian. To which I'd say, well, look, to believe in God, you don't need to go to church. But if you do believe in God, particularly, God as revealed to us through Jesus, then there's absolutely no reason you can't go to church, because you are the church. And so the reason we go to church is not to get necessarily something out of it, although that we should be fed and encouraged. It's what we pour into it. I think of President John Kennedy's words: "Think not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." And I guess in some ways we could reclaim that for the church. Think not what your church can do for you, but what can you do for your church. And so out of today, we've got some challenges, some applications. First is that we are the church, we are the body. And so I'd love to encourage you to think about getting involved in the church in some way, in loving your church, praying for it, serving into it, giving into it, being the church and getting involved and blessing and loving your church as the church. Our job is to testify. We're called to help give people hope, help people experience hope. And so as we go about our day, love for you to be praying and looking for opportunities for you to bless and love and encourage people, and to know your testimony, know your story, so that when the opportunity arises, well, hey, for me, there's this God who loves me, and it makes all the difference. And finally, we demonstrate that we are the church and that I am a Christian through our charity, starting at home and then moving out beyond our church family. And this is where small groups are so powerful and so important, because they become a place where you can really love and bless and support and encourage each other in a way that I could never, as the pastor, as the priest, could do for you. And so I hope over the coming weeks you might be really encouraged to go, yeah, I am a Christian. I've put my faith in Jesus, and I'm not perfect, and the church isn't perfect, and there's lots that we've got wrong, but there's a lot that we get right, and I'm proud to say that Jesus is my Lord, and that God is my God, and I don't always get it right, but I will do my best to love and serve Him and serve the world in His name. Amen.
Thanks for joining us for the Gold Coast North Anglican Church podcast. I invite you to like us, follow us, subscribe to our podcast so that way you don't miss out on any episodes. If you want to know more about Gold Coast North Anglican Church, then head over to our website. The address is goldcoastnorth.org.au, and there you can find out all about our church. I also encourage you to engage with us on Facebook. We would love to pray with you and connect with you. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. God bless.